Aloha ohana. I hope you're all having a great week. For those of you visiting for the first time, hi, my name is Kai, and here on this channel we talk about all true crime cases that happen in the 808 state. So if you're interested in true crime and Hawaii, I highly suggest you hit that subscribe button and turn on your notifications so that you don't miss any weekly uploads. Now, there's an elephant in the room, and before we go forward, I know I have been gone for over a month. I want to go ahead and apologize. I'm really sorry. I've been taking care of some personal things with my family. I've also had family visiting in town. But moving forward, I'm glad to say that I've been working on my content calendar, and from now until the year on out, I have it all planned out. So crossing fingers that filming is on schedule. I should be here every week, at least once a week for you guys. All right. So I'm so sorry that I was gone. I missed you guys too. Anyways, before we jump into today's video, please remember that this video is intended to spread awareness. It's never my intent to spread false information, and I try my best at researching all the details of a case before I compile it into one video for you guys. All right, today's case, guys. Today's case is not a new case. It's an unsolved murder mystery case. I wanted to do this case because not only because it happened in Hawaii, but because it's one of those cases where when you learn about the details, you'll get frustrated because you're like, it's obvious who the killer is. Why was the killer never arrested? You know, why hasn't this person ever been, you know, why hasn't this person ever paid for their crimes? It's just so frustrating, and you'll understand what I mean as you listen to the details of the case. All right, so let's just start from the very beginning. On January 20th, 1982, around 9:45 p.m., 19-year-old hairdresser Lisa Au was finishing her shift at Susan Beer Salon in Kailua on Oahu, and she had plans to meet up with her boyfriend at his sister's apartment in Makiki. Now, although it was a wet, cold, and downright just pouring that night, Lisa decided to make the drive anyway. And for those of you not familiar with Oahu, driving from Kailua on the windward side, and excuse me, I am a little stuffed up, to Makiki, which is basically in town, it's not a super far drive, but you know, it's late, it's, you know, 10 o'clock at night, it's dark, it's raining, so it's kind of a drive, you know. Anyways, she decides to go anyway, and before she goes, she stops in at MJ's grocery store and picks up some poke to bring over with her. Now, for those of you who don't know what poke is, you and I can never be friends. No. Poke is a really big deal in Hawaii. It's basically, and I'll put up a picture for you guys, it's basically fresh fish cut up and diced up, you know, cubes, mixed with all different types of ingredients. It just depends on what you like. It can be mixed with limu or seaweed, you know, round onion, throw in some Hawaiian salt, avocado, you know, fish eggs. There's all different types of poke. So if you have not tried poke and you love fish, raw fish, and you know, like if you eat sushi and raw fish, you're missing out. So go and try some poke, especially if you are in Hawaii or you're visiting Hawaii. Anyways, I'm getting off topic, moving on. So after MJ's, Lisa drives to Makiki and arrives at the Mott Smith Laniloa Apartments located at 1717 Mott Smith Drive. Now, just a little before 11 o'clock p.m. that night, Lisa and her then boyfriend, Doug Holmes, a student attending UH Manoa, are overheard by a security guard of the apartments arguing and fighting. So Thomas Thornburg, and he says about 12:20 a.m., Lisa is seen jumping in her car and driving off. And then a few moments after that, Doug is seen jumping in his blue car and driving after Lisa. Now, this would be the last night anybody ever saw Lisa alive. Lisa Au was born on July 25th, 1962. to parents Chester Dennis Au and her mother Patrice Mahiaikalani Akim Au Kaunamano. She was of Hawaiian and Chinese descent. She's about 5'5", 120 pounds, and she had beautiful, long, wavy black hair. Lisa's friends and family describe her as being hardworking, friendly, responsible, and Lisa was excited for her future. She recently had gotten her driver's license on January 18, 1982. So the next day, Lisa's parents, they're worried. You know, Lisa didn't come home. They don't know where she is. And now this is back in 1982, guys, right? So there's no cell phones and there's no pagers. They call up Doug and they ask him if he's seen her because they knew that Doug and Lisa were together the night before. Doug tells them that they're separate ways and that he thought that she was on her way home. So Doug offers to go out and look for Lisa. And of course, Lisa's parents are very thankful for this. They're very grateful. You know, by now, they're both understandably very, very worried about Lisa's whereabouts. Doug finds Lisa's car parked at the side of the highway in Maunawili near the old Kailua drive-in. Doug calls the police to tell them he had found Lisa's 1976 Toyota car. Now, when police arrive at Lisa's car, they find a bunch of strange, things. They find that the driver's side window was rolled out halfway. There was about 2 to 3 inches of water on the floorboards in Lisa's car. You know, the seats in the car was just soaking wet from the night before because it was raining. But what strikes the police officer as odd was that Lisa's purse was placed on the driver's seat and was completely dry, as if it had been placed there after the fact. And also what's strange is that the police officer said that Doug had a bunch of scratches on his face. Technicians that come to inspect Lisa's car noted that the vehicle had been wiped clean of any evidence. And when they say wiped clean, it means that someone intentionally took a rag or took a towel or whatever and wiped the car down to get rid of any evidence. Lisa's car has been located, but still no signs of Lisa. There's a statewide search for the 19-year-old, and thousands of missing flyers are distributed all over Oahu. Because Lisa's car was found on the windward side of Oahu near Maunawili Highway, a lot of the volunteer search teams focused in that area.
Thousands of cars at Ala Moana Shopping Center today as part of an island-wide effort to locate Lisa Au.
Word spread of the 19-year-old's disappearance. Thousands of flyers were distributed island-wide.
Hundreds of volunteers, Marines and civilians, have helped police to comb the roadsides for miles around the spot where Lisa's car was found.
Lisa Au's family struggled to thank the hundreds of volunteers searching for their daughter.
Thank you is just not enough. They have been just great. The support has been just marvelous.
January 31st, 1982, a jogger and his dog are out running and they find Lisa's nude, decomposing body inside a ravine near Tantalus Drive. Lisa's case immediately goes from a missing persons case to a homicide case. Lieutenant Bert Cornell was assigned to the Criminal Investigations Division, and this became the case that would plague him for many years to come. So Lisa's murderer was never brought to justice, till today, and the investigation was pretty much botched due to premature conclusions and bad evidence. And I'm gonna go ahead and explain that. You see, when Lisa's purse was searched, they noticed that her temporary driver's license was missing and her car registration. So detectives just automatically assumed that a police officer must have been the one that had pulled her over, right? Because when you get pulled over at a stop, police officers, they ask you for what? Driver's license and car registration. So detectives automatically assumed that she must have gotten pulled over by a police. Now, somehow the public got word of this and the public began to panic.
Within days of Lisa Au's murder, one of their own, That theory became public and caused fear that a policeman was pulling over women to attack them. How did they come to suspect that an officer was involved? And why were they so focused on him?
Marsland's office and the police have a suspect in mind, but building the case has not been easy.
For about a year, an investigative grand jury heard evidence against a Honolulu police officer, but then prosecuting attorney Charles Marsland wasn't able to indict.
The investigative grand jury, currently hearing evidence gathered in the Lisa Au case, will not return an indictment.
Former HPD Homicide Lieutenant Bert Corneal says law enforcement wasted time and resources because of intense public pressure for an arrest.
So already they had formulated premature conclusions.
He says they jumped on any clue that pointed to the policeman's involvement. Lisa's temporary license missing from her purse and her car window rolled down halfway. In their minds, that meant she was pulled over and passed the license to the officer. After the suspected officer's name leaked out, another woman from the windward side claimed he also pulled her over and that he used blue lights on his unmarked car.
It is police policy that a uniformed officer must be present when a plainclothes officer makes a stop.
The department reassured women that they didn't have to stop for unmarked police cars and eventually banned flashing lights on the car grill. That suspicious traffic stop, the officer's address near Lisa Au's home, and his background, which included a sex harassment complaint from a young female during a police ride-along, were the primary pieces of evidence they had against him.
Linking the suspect to the crime has been frustrating police and prosecutors for months.
When the grand jury failed to indict the officer, Corneal says it tainted the case, exposed mistakes the detectives had made, and that discouraged other prosecutors from trying again. To this day, many still believe it was a police officer who killed Lisa Au. Corneal says a shoddy investigation closed the door on evidence against others. Frustrated, Corneal left HPD later that year and started his own private investigations company, Corneal and Associates. Among his first clients, the family of Lisa Au and their attorney, Roy Chang.
They were struggling, and she meant a lot to them. And I think that's kind of the part that maybe gets forgotten, is that she was really a wonderful person that they loved and maybe held that family together.
Trying to get answers for the family, Bert Corneal started over in his investigation. He interviewed witnesses he says detectives failed to track down or simply ignored. He also found evidence that seemed to debunk the killer cop theory.
At this point, you remember that Lieutenant Bert Corneal? He's retired from the force and he goes into the private sector. So the Owls, they hire him to look into Lisa's murder. And what Bert Corneal does is he basically goes to the beginning, he starts from scratch, and he starts to talk to and interview witnesses that he says detectives basically didn't interview or ignored altogether. And he goes back and he traces Lisa's steps back to the MJ store. And he finds out that when Lisa went to go buy poke, she had written a check to pay for the poke. And we all know that back in the day, when you write a check, you have to show some form of identification. And that's what she did. She pulled out her temporary driver's license as show proof of ID, but it still doesn't answer the question of what happened to her car registration, because remember, both her license and her registration was missing. Did the registration, fold in with the license and she accidentally left both of it there at MJ's? Anyways, so Corneal basically debunks the cop killer theory, right? So it's not a police officer that took her ID. Then what Corneal does, is he goes to the Mott Smith Lanilo apartments and he interviews the security guard, Thomas Thornburg. Remember, that was a security guard and the guy that overheard Lisa and Doug arguing that night. So he goes and he talks to Thomas, and Thomas tells Cornell, yes, I overheard them arguing. I saw Lisa jump in her car, and moments later I saw Doug jump in his blue car, after her. And Thomas said that he was never interviewed at all from anybody, from the detectives, from a police officer. Like, nobody came and talked to him.
Cornell tracked down was Charlotte Kamaka, a newspaper delivery driver. She later testified before the grand jury about what she saw on Tatlas in the hours Lisa Au went missing. She said she was on her regular route about 2:30 a.m. In one statement in the police records, she says a man drove past her in a blue car with a female passenger who appeared to be asleep or unconscious. She said, what alerted me was her head fell. When the car made the turn, her head just fell. Later, she said she got a good look at the driver as he turned around in a paved lookout. She said when the car made a complete turn, he just stopped and stared at her. But now, the female passenger was gone.
Initially was startled by her, and he drove the car to the side of her where it was driver to driver.
After the body was found in the same area 10 days later, Charlotte Kamaka went to the police station to report what she saw. She said the detective wrote down information on how to contact her, but she said she never was contacted. She kept contacting them to see what they were doing. In the area of a mudslide, Officer Michael Rayfelt was directing traffic and says he did not remember seeing Lisa's broken Toyota. But months later, he was asked to tell the grand jury that he did and report that he saw a patrol officer at the car. Rayfelt says he refused to lie.
What's interesting to me is that it doesn't say, and I'm not sure if Cornell ever showed Charlotte a picture of Doug Holmes, of Lisa's boyfriend. So I'm not sure if Charlotte ever identified the driver of the blue car. Now remember, Doug Holmes did own a blue car at the time. Like Charlotte said, she had a good look at the driver. So it's just so odd to me. Okay, now let's talk about Doug Holmes. So Doug Holmes was Lisa Au's then boyfriend. Okay? Doug Holmes was a student attending UH Manoa at the time. He was the one that located Lisa's car the day after she went missing, right? He was the one that called the police. And Doug actually admitted to Detective Nelson Lum that he was trying to end the relationship with Lisa. He said it was because he and Lisa were moving in opposite directions. He said that he wanted, to go to college and had this big old plans for his future, and that Lisa was more or less okay with just being where she was and standing still. So it almost sounded as if they wanted two different things. So he was trying to end the relationship with Lisa. Now, Doug Holmes did take 2 lie detector tests, and he failed both of the tests. Now, we all know that lie detector tests can be inconclusive, right? And when Detective Lum asked Doug why he was failing these tests, Doug's excuse was that he felt guilty. Okay, he said he felt guilty because he had let Lisa drive home in that bad weather, and he said that Lisa was an inexperienced driver. Now, these are Doug's words. I don't know if Lisa was an inexperienced driver. We know that Lisa had just gotten her driver's license 2 days before she went missing. It doesn't mean she was an inexperienced driver. This is just what Doug said. So he said that he's failing these tests because he felt guilty of letting her drive home that night in such bad weather because she was an inexperienced driver. Now, Detective Lum, he bought this. He bought these excuses. He was like, oh, okay, yeah, sure. Doug Holmes fails 2 lie detector tests, and that's his excuse, and you're gonna buy it. Now, the reason why Detective Lum believed Doug Holmes and believed that Doug was Lisa's murderer is because he said that there was no financial, monetary involvement. So there's no financial gain to be had. Lisa was not pregnant. They weren't expecting a child or anything like that. and there was no other third party. Like Doug wasn't cheating or Lisa wasn't cheating. Now that we know of, Lisa's parents, Chester and Patrice, both passed away, and it's sad to say that they both never found out what really happened to their baby girl. You know, they never had any kind of justice for Lisa. If Doug Holmes is the one that's responsible for Lisa's death, which all signs point to Doug, you know, it's pretty unfortunate that the HPD, you know, unit botched the investigation and things just fell the way they fell. Now, her cause of death was never determined.
After Lisa Au was killed, her body was exhumed. Police took her skull and jawbone and asked the coroner in Los Angeles to do what Honolulu's medical examiner could not do: determine the cause of her death.
Well, there's so much that you can tell from the skull that you can't tell from the bones of the neck down.
Forensic anthropologist Dr. Robert Mann of the University of Hawaii has worked cases including the September 11th attacks and serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer. He says a human skull can provide so many clues. But Dr. Mann says a less experienced examiner can easily miss the signs.
If you miss that one little mark, that one little indicator of possibly cause of death, you're going to go, we don't have any evidence of what this person died of. But it's there, so you got to be very careful.
In 1983, when Lisa Au's body was exhumed, Bert Corneal had left the police department and was working as a private investigator for the Au family. He believed the Honolulu coroner did not do a thorough job on the first autopsy.
It was left in a bag. She's decomposing.
He noted the remains were still in the HPD body bag and that he was appalled that there was leaves and dirt and rubbish inside. He says the body was never even washed. Corneal's report says the medical examiner was pretty red-faced and embarrassed when this was all revealed. A second opinion was sought by the Los Angeles coroner, who took a look at the skull and jawbone.
Advanced postmortem decomposition makes it very difficult.
The results of that exam were never made public.
What do we have here?
Dr. Robert Mann said he'd be willing to take another look. Perhaps new technology can help if he could have access. But there is some dispute about where the skull and jawbone are now. HPD says it was in the hands of the medical examiner's office, and the ME says it was returned to the casket with the rest of the remains. But Lisa Au's family wonders if the items were indeed returned. The only way to re-examine would require disturbing her grave again.
That's all I have for you guys today. I totally apologize. I'm stuffed up and I don't know what's going on with my sinuses, but let me know what you guys think. Have you heard about this case? Do you know all the details? And who do you think is responsible for Lisa's death? All right, thank you guys so much for hanging out with me. I will see you guys next week. Aloha, aloha, aloha. Thank you. Bye.